Okay, boys, take it away.
Hey, good morning. COVID-19 has us down again. We're on lockdown again. But
Are we on lockdown?
kind of. No, we're not on lockdown.
we got to be careful what we put out there, Dean.
Oh, okay. Hey, good morning.
Feels like it locked down.
We feel like we're locked down, but we're not going to do it. We're going to be happy, joyful, and praise the Lord.
And Brad, what do you think of that?
Yes, that's right.
So what are you guys doing this morning?
We're going for a walk.
Are you? Where are you going to go?
We're going to walk through the Movie Colony neighborhood and Old Las Palmas and see as many famous people's homes as possible.
Oh,
We're going to look for famous people.
Well, I
Trying-
don't think they're here, but
trying to stay healthy.
Lily Tomlin was here, and Jane Fonda was just here.
oh, well, maybe we'll see them.
Okay. Well, anything else?
Nope, we just want to say hello to everybody. Hello.
All right. Have a great walk,
All right,
boys.
see you later.
Bye. So that was Dean and Brad welcoming you to worship today. I'm Tim, pastor developer of Hope Palm Springs, a new Lutheran faith community in the desert, and I too want to welcome you to worship today. It doesn't matter who you love or who you choose to marry, or even how you vote in political elections, you are welcome here. If you are a Christian, perhaps even a Lutheran Christian, or you seek the presence of God in the world through a different faith understanding, you are welcome here. If you embrace church or have an aversion to organized religion, perhaps somewhere in the past you were hurt and your experience in the church, maybe wounded, maybe even told that there was something about you that God couldn't love, then I want you to know you are welcome here at Hope Palm Springs. So take a moment or two to center your heart, your mind, your whole self on the presence of God who is with you, God's Spirit there with you. You are not alone. And listen to the words of the gospel lesson today, where Jesus invites us again to hear the call of God, to be not only an open and affirming community of faith, but fully embracing of all people, reflecting the beautiful diversity of our culture and our community. For who are we ever to exclude someone from the love of God? Who are we ever to draw a boundary around God's grace and to place somebody outside that boundary? Welcome to virtual worship. The Holy Gospel, according to St. Matthew, the 13th chapter. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the servants of the householder came and said to him, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The servants said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Then Jesus left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." Here ends the reading. Someone once said that a parable is like a good joke. If you have to have it explained to you, don't bother. Well, in today's lesson, Jesus tells a simple parable of the wheat and the weeds. And a little while later, in private, the disciples ask Jesus, "Jesus, would you please tell us the meaning of this parable?" And so Jesus does. But here's where we have to be careful. For in hearing the explanation, it is easy to conclude that we have grasped the full meaning of the parable. But the truth is that we often finish with the parable long before the parable has finished with us. Another way to say it is, rather than trying to interpret correctly this parable, it would be better to allow it to interpret us and to expose whatever truth may be lying at its heart when it comes to your life and mine. Okay, so first, a little horticultural background. According to some commentaries that I read, the noxious weed spoken of in the parable was probably something called darnel. The Greek word for it is zizanion, and its species and genus would be Lolium temulentum. It was well known as a poisonous plant, but it looked so much like wheat in its early stages of growth that even rabbis of the day called it a perverted wheat. It could not be distinguished from the wheat until the plants headed out, or until the ears of the weed would appear. The ear of wheat is heavy and it droops. The ear of darnel, the weed, is not as heavy and it stands upright. But long before that, the roots of the wheat and the darnel become so intertwined that one plant could not be pulled out without also tearing up the other. And so we can immediately clue in as to why when the servants in the parable ask the master, "Do you want us to go and gather the weeds?" the master wisely responds, "No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow until the harvest, and then they will be separated." Well, so much for your botanical lesson of the day. Now let's turn to an interesting part of Jesus' explanation to the parable. Remember, the sower is Jesus, who sows the good seed into the field, which, as Jesus says, is the world. The enemy is the devil, who sows the darnel, or the false wheat. But the one explanation that Jesus leaves out is he doesn't say who the servants are who want to go and separate the wheat from the weeds. And so we can assume that maybe those servants in the gospel lesson are those who would like to make a judgment between the good seed and the bad, between the wheat that belongs and the weeds that don't, between what is worthy to be taken into the barn at the harvest and what is worthy of nothing more than to be destroyed, gathered into bundles to be burned. And if we set aside our need to analyze this parable and to figure it out, and instead allow this parable to interpret our lives, we see in it our human proclivity, perhaps, to want to do a similar thing. To separate what we have determined is the good from the evil. To separate those that we think fit in and those that we think don't. To separate those that we have decided should belong and those that we have labeled as not worthy to belong. As humans, we tend to judge others so quickly. And as Christians, we are more guilty of this than anyone. I mean, after all, we have seen the light. We see with such clarity. We possess the truth. We are ahead of the curve. We know where the line is. We think we understand the difference between right and wrong, between good people and bad people, maybe even thinking we can decide between those who are worthy of God's love and those who aren't. And this is what the parable confronts us if we dare allow ourselves to be confronted. One of our faith community's values is that of inclusivity. We want to be intentional about welcoming all people. Many of those in our faith community know what it is to have been excluded by a church that said in one way or another that there was something about us that God couldn't love. And many of us at one time turned our back on a church that had rejected us. Now, it's no secret that we are a faith community whose makeup is about 60% gay. We have no intention of being only a gay church, but rather a church that reflects the beautiful diversity of Palm Springs. Gay and straight, male, female, transgender, black and white, and so many other colors and categories of people. But many of us who are gay heard the bullshit rhetoric of the past. God hates the sin, but loves the sinner. You can be gay in orientation, but not in behavior. But in 2009, the Spirit of God blew through the church once again, and our ELCA became a kinder place and embraced fully the radical and beautiful dimension of the gospel, deciding to ordain gays and lesbians, sending an affirming message to those who had been disenfranchised from the church, marginalized because of boundaries drawn around the love of God that kept many on the outside of that love. Well, we do not want to make the same mistake. So we have to constantly check ourselves. Who are those persons or groups of persons that you or I have placed outside the circle of God's grace, those that we have determined are weeds and not wheat? You know, while we live in a diverse community with plenty of openness, remember, it is our proclivity as human beings to exclude, to be arrogant enough to judge the worthiness of another. At the risk of offending some of you, perhaps even all of you, let me bring this up. If you're a Republican, are the Democrats the ones who have it all wrong? Are they the weeds in our political system? Or if you are a Democrat, do you have severe problems with Republicans? Or what about this? You who call yourselves Christians, is the Jewish person or the Muslim or the Hindu, or for heaven's sake, the atheist or the agnostic, someone that you have excluded from the grace of God simply because their belief system or lack of belief system sets them apart from you? We talk about the circle of God's grace, a horrible image. For whenever we draw a circle around something, there are those on the inside and then there are those on the outside. And we must ask ourselves, who do we exclude? Who do we either intentionally or even passively keep away from this new faith community? Who do we prevent from being included? And furthermore, who are those in this community that we ignore, that we neglect, that we exclude from the very same grace that none of us ever deserved in the first place, but have so freely received? Don't judge. Don't judge. It's not for you to decide who's in and who's out. And so the parable stands as an indictment against those servants who think they have the ability to distinguish between the wheat and the weeds. They are that audacious to believe they can decipher between two species of plants that look identical. They are arrogant to assume the right to make a judgment between those plants that should stay and those plants that should be uprooted. Did you notice in the explanation of the parable what Jesus says? The harvest is at the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. The servants who want to already separate the wheat from the weeds don't get to make that decision. It is for the angels to do that job. In other words, only God has the right to determine that which is good and that which is evil, that which belongs and that which does not belong, that which is well within the boundaries of God's grace and that which is not. It is not for us to judge, because in our judging, we cannot determine rightfully what is the wheat and what is the darnel. We cannot see into another person's heart, and we are therefore not able to understand another person's motives, at least not completely. Therefore, in uprooting what we think are the weeds, we just might uproot the wheat as well. We would surely make mistakes. And so Jesus says, do not judge. It is not what you are called to do. For now let the weeds and the wheat grow together until the time of the harvest, and then they will be separated. What God does with the weeds at that point is God's business, not ours. In the meantime, we have but one job. We are called to be centered in one task as God's people. And it is so simple that it is baffling that we so often forget to live louder, to love harder, and care deeper. We are called to proclaim the good news of the gospel to all people, all kinds of people everywhere, not making excuses to exclude those that we have decided either aren't worthy or don't belong, or even who are simply undesirable to the point where we ignore them. We are to love. No exceptions. Jesus says, forget about trying to distinguish between the wheat and the weeds. You have no right to presume that you can even tell the difference. Rather, set that agenda completely aside and follow my call to share with any and all the love that I have for them. Because maybe, just maybe, the power of the gospel has the ability to turn even weeds into wheat. For maybe, just maybe, the love of God extends far beyond any artificial boundary we could ever create. And maybe, just maybe, God's grace has no boundary. And to that, Jesus says, let anyone with ears listen. Amen.